I waited for the perfect time, and I lost 20 years. That is the sentence I wish I had heard much earlier, and the sentence I wish someone had forced me to understand before life taught it to me the hard way. Because waiting sounds harmless when you are doing it. It even sounds wise. It sounds patient, responsible, mature. You tell yourself you are not avoiding life. You are preparing for it. You tell yourself you are being smart. You tell yourself you are not saying no forever, only not yet. And that is how the years go. Not through one giant mistake, but through 1,000 delays that all feel temporary while they are happening. That was my life. I was always almost ready. Almost ready to start. Almost ready to change. Almost ready to take the risk. Almost ready to become the person I wanted to be. Almost. That word cost me more than failure ever did. I did not think of myself as a coward. I thought of myself as thoughtful, careful, strategic. I liked to believe I was waiting for the right conditions, the right season, the right amount of money, the right amount of certainty, the right version of myself. I told myself I would move when things calmed down, when I had more confidence, when the kids were older, when work was less demanding, when the market was better, when life was more stable, when I had more information, when I felt less afraid. But the truth is, life rarely gives you those conditions all at once. There is almost always some uncertainty, some discomfort, some risk, some reason to postpone. And if you build your life around needing perfect conditions before you move, then you do not build a life at all. You build a waiting room. That is what I did. I lived in a waiting room for 2 decades. It did not look like a waiting room from the outside. It looked like a normal life, a responsible life, a busy life. I worked. I paid bills. I showed up. I handled what needed handling. I kept things going. And all the while, I told myself that my real life would begin later when the timing improved. That is one of the most dangerous stories a person can believe, that the meaningful part of life is still ahead, but only after one more phase, one more problem, one more season of endurance. The world is full of people who are enduring their present while quietly betraying their future. I think some people are naturally impulsive. I was never one of them. I leaned the other way. I overthought everything. I wanted clarity before commitment, certainty before action, safety before movement. I wanted guarantees life was never going to give me. I wanted proof that things would work out before I was willing to begin. And if you live like that, you can spend years calling your hesitation wisdom while it slowly becomes regret. That is the part no one tells you when you are younger. Delay has a cost, even when nothing explodes. Delay reshapes your identity. Delay trains you to mistrust action. Delay makes the life you want feel more distant every year. Delay turns possibility into memory before you even notice it happening. There were so many things I wanted to do that I kept placing on a shelf labeled later. Some were practical. A business idea I believed in. Skills I wanted to develop. Financial changes I knew I needed to make. Health habits I promised myself I would get serious about. Some were more personal. Trips I wanted to take. Conversations I needed to have. Parts of myself I wanted to reclaim. A quieter, truer way of living that I kept postponing because the current version of life felt too demanding to challenge. I thought I was preserving my options. But that is not what waiting does. Waiting narrows you. It teaches you to live in a smaller emotional range. It makes boldness feel inappropriate. It makes desire feel inconvenient. It slowly turns your dreams into background noise. At first, that noise is still loud enough to hear. You still feel the pull. You still think about the thing you want to do. You still say, one day. But if one day keeps getting pushed far enough, something changes. You stop speaking about it with conviction. Then you stop speaking about it at all. Then, eventually, you stop checking whether you still want it because asking the question hurts too much. That is how parts of a person die. Quietly, respectably, without ceremony. I remember being in my 40s and thinking life still felt wide open. I remember saying things like, I still have time. And technically I did. That is what makes the trap so cruel. The people who waste time usually do still have some left in the beginning. That is why it is easy to relax inside postponement. You can always point to the calendar and say there's still room. But the problem is not whether time remains. The problem is what waiting is doing to you while time remains. Every year you live in hesitation, it becomes more natural. Every year you do not act, the person who would have acted becomes less familiar. Every year you postpone the hard conversation, the necessary change, the honest beginning. The future becomes heavier because now it must carry not only your dream, but all the years you delayed it. There is a phrase I used often without realizing how much damage it was doing. I would say, now is just not the right time. I said it about money. I said it about health. I said it about work. I said it about pursuing anything that required courage. Now is just not the right time. It sounded sensible. Who could argue with timing? Timing is invisible enough that you can always blame it. But the older I got, the more I realized that timing was often just fear wearing a watch. Timing was my respectable excuse. Timing was the polite version of I'm scared to begin. And because the excuse sounded intelligent, I trusted it for years. The truth is, there are good reasons to wait sometimes. Not every impulse is wise. Not every desire should be acted on immediately. But there is a difference between waiting with intention and waiting out of avoidance. Waiting with intention has a plan. It prepares. It gathers. It moves when the chosen moment comes. Avoidance waits for a feeling. It waits for confidence. It waits for the disappearance of discomfort. It waits for certainty. And because certainty never fully comes, avoidance can stretch on almost indefinitely. That was my pattern. I was not preparing. I was circling. I was not being patient. I was being afraid in a way that looked responsible enough to keep me comfortable. I lost 20 years like that. Not in total misery. That would almost be easier to notice. I lost them in a half-awake state. Life was happening, but I was not fully inside it. I was maintaining, enduring, postponing, existing inside plans I kept not starting. And here is the part that hurts most. While I was waiting for conditions to improve, life was not waiting for me. My body changed. My children grew. My energy shifted. The market changed. The world moved. Relationships evolved. The version of me that could have started in one season became older and more tired in the next. Time was not pausing while I prepared to live. It was moving quietly and relentlessly while I kept saying later. I used to think that one big decision would finally change everything. That there would be a clear turning point when I would suddenly feel ready. And from that day on, I would become the person I knew I could be. But life almost never changes that way. Most of the time, transformation is not one giant leap. It is a painful series of smaller acts of honesty. It is admitting that your waiting is no longer wisdom. It is seeing that your standards for ready are impossible. It is recognizing that you have made emotional safety more sacred than growth. I did not know how to do that when I was younger. So instead, I kept decorating my hesitation with intelligent language. People do this all the time. They say they are researching, thinking it through, keeping their options open, being realistic, making sure. They say they will start after the holidays, after this quarter, after the kids are older, after things settle down, after they save more, after they lose weight, after they feel better, after they understand more. And sometimes those reasons are real. But many times those reasons are part of a long-standing agreement with fear. An agreement that says, I will not force you to change if you help me sound reasonable. That agreement cost me years. I remember an old notebook I found once, tucked away in a drawer. It had plans in it. Real plans. Ideas, budgets, timelines, notes about things I wanted to build and change. When I looked at the dates on those pages, it felt like being hit in the chest. Because the man who wrote those plans believed he was on the edge of beginning. He believed life was about to move. He believed he was close. But I knew, holding that notebook years later, that most of it never happened. Not because it was impossible. Not because it was foolish. Because I waited. Because I revised instead of beginning. Because I kept seeking the perfect setup instead of respecting the imperfect chance in front of me. There is a kind of grief that comes from failure. But there is another kind that comes from unlived potential. And I believe that second kind can be heavier. Failure at least has movement in it. Failure means you stepped. You tried. You collided with reality and learned. But unlived potential is different. It haunts. It lingers. It asks questions that do not go away. What if I had started then? What if I had been brave sooner? What if I had accepted uncertainty as part of the path instead of treating it like a warning sign? What if I had understood that no meaningful life is built under perfect conditions? The perfect time is a myth. That does not mean timing does not matter. It does. But there is no season in which life becomes fully risk-free. There is no age when you suddenly feel immune to doubt. There is no magical week when all responsibilities disappear and your courage arrives polished and complete. Most good things are built in the middle of ordinary life, not after life clears a special space for them. Most important decisions are made while you are still uncertain. Most beautiful futures begin before you feel ready. That is the truth I resisted for too long. I also think waiting changed how I saw myself. When you delay long enough, you begin to lose respect for your own promises. You tell yourself you will begin, and you don't. You tell yourself this year will be different, and it isn't. You tell yourself you are serious, but your habits quietly say otherwise. Over time, that creates a fracture in your character. You start distrusting yourself. You stop believing your own intentions. You become someone who thinks deeply and acts late. Someone who feels strongly and moves slowly. Someone who confuses awareness with transformation. I became that person for a long time. I knew many things. I understood many things. I could explain many things. But understanding is not the same as living. And the sad thing is, the world will often let you stay there. People will call you thoughtful, measured, responsible, sensible. They may even respect your caution. But respect from the outside cannot quiet the voice inside that knows you are postponing your own life. I heard that voice many times, usually at night, usually in stillness. It would ask me the same question in different forms. How much longer are you going to wait? And I rarely answered honestly. I would say soon. I would say when things settle down. I would say after I figure a few things out. I did not understand that the person I was becoming through all that waiting was not neutral. He was being shaped by it. By the time I truly understood the cost, I was older than I ever imagined being when I finally started. That is one of the strange shocks of life. You keep postponing a future version of yourself, and then one day you meet him. And he is older, more tired, and carrying the weight of all the versions you never became. I do not say that with self-hatred. I say it with honesty. I was not evil. I was not lazy. I was just too loyal to the idea that I needed ideal conditions before I was allowed to live boldly. That loyalty stole years from me. If I could speak to my younger self, I would tell him this. The cost of waiting is not only lost time. It is lost self-trust, lost momentum, lost courage, lost versions of life that can only be built in certain seasons. I would tell him that clarity often comes from action, not before it. I would tell him that if he keeps waiting to feel ready, he may one day become skilled at waiting and unskilled at living. I would tell him that there are doors that do not stay open forever, not because life is cruel, but because seasons change. Energy changes. People change. You change. Time is not your enemy, but it is not your employee either. It does not work for you. It keeps moving. I do not believe it is ever too late to tell the truth. And the truth I finally had to tell was simple. I was not waiting for the perfect time. I was waiting to avoid discomfort. Once I admitted that, something shifted. Not all at once, but enough. Enough to make me stop worshiping readiness. Enough to make me stop asking life for guarantees it never promised. Enough to make me understand that beginning imperfectly is often far more powerful than planning perfectly. Enough to see that most of what I wanted was never on the other side of a perfect moment. It was on the other side of a decision. That is what I want you to hear if you are listening to me now and feeling the ache of recognition. If there is something in your life you keep postponing, ask yourself why. Not the polite answer. The true one. Are you really being wise? Or are you protecting yourself from the discomfort of becoming new? Are you really waiting for better timing? Or are you hoping life will remove the fear for you? Are you really preparing? Or are you rehearsing indefinitely so you never have to be seen trying? Because life does not reward endless hesitation. It does not hand back the years you spent circling. It simply moves. And one day, if you are not careful, you may realize that the perfect time you were waiting for never existed. There was only the actual time, the imperfect time, the inconvenient time, the uncertain time, the human time, the only time in which real change is ever made. I waited for the perfect time, and I lost 20 years. I cannot get those years back. But I can say this clearly now. The perfect time is usually a story fear tells to keep you still. Start before you feel ready. Speak before everything is polished. Move while the conditions are imperfect. Respect the season you are in, but do not worship its obstacles. Your life is not waiting for your readiness. It is unfolding with or without your permission. Do not spend the next 20 years preparing to become yourself. Begin now.